This is going to be a deep dive on variables inside Director because these are some of the most powerful options you can have when creating shows, and they are probably the closest thing to Arduino programming you're going to encounter. And the reason for that is if you go here under Show and Variables, you'll see that variables are Booleans and integers. And if you are familiar with any kind of programming, you'll know that Booleans and integers are basically how a lot of things are called for. Booleans are true, false. They are binary. They are ones and zeros, on, off, etc., etc. So it is a toggle state essentially. And integers, as you can see here, is from 0 to 255, which means you have 255 different options to mess with. Before we get started with a lot of the involved examples, I want to show you just a very basic way to hopefully help you wrap your head around how variables work. And so I'm just going to name this things. I'm going to name this more things, like that. There we go. So now we're going to come up here into behaviors, and I'm going to make a behavior where the input state, if it turns on, then we get a modification of the variable. And here, this drop down, you can see my list of integers and booleans. I'm going to do the boolean first. I'm going to have it set to true because it starts at false. Hit OK. And now let's do the thing that it does when that happens. If the variable state of the Boolean is equal to true, then it'll control an output. The LED turns on like that. And that is the most basic way you could use a variable. Now, you would never have to use a variable this way in Director because normally you would just say input state control output, obviously. But I'm using this as an example to help you understand before we get too crazy with the cheese whiz. Now, obviously, we can do an integer here, like this. Instead of this, we could drop down to things and have it set to 1, because it starts at 0. And then over here, same thing. If this is equal to 0, then it turns on the LED. So that right there, if anything, follow along with this, just with your own controller, just to kind of wrap your head around this, so you understand what's happening as we get into some of the more involved examples. And we'll do that now, and we'll start with integers, and then slowly move into Booleans. And this first example is, let's say you have multiple puzzles that lead to one thing, right? But these can be done in any order. This isn't a linear progression, it's more of a parallel progression, right? So how do you make it know when it's time to go to your success scene? Well, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna go to your waiting situation here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to say input 1, which is button 1 here. And I'm going to have, when that turns on, we're going to do scene control, and that will go to thing 1, like that. And we'll do that for each scene, because what we want to do is we want to have each scene play its sound effect or animation or whatever, and then play the success scene. That's going to be one of the important things there. Let's crank that out. There we go. Like that. And let's see, go back and do this. And there we go. Button 3 and scene control. Now, technically, you don't have to have the third thing play its animation, but if it's important to your game and your story, you probably want it to do that. Okay. The final thing is going to be programming to know when to go to the success scene. And we'll come back to that in a second, because what we want to do here is at thing 1, we're going to say at scene, we'll say scene position at the end. You could do it at the beginning. You could have it wherever. I just like to do it here at the end. We're going to go to modify variable. Now, down here in the list, you'll notice the integer things we did earlier. So we go to things, and now we can set this to a certain number, or we can have it increase and decrease in value. And what we're doing is we're going to have it increase in value by 1. Now, by default, when the room starts up, when a game starts, all the integers are set to 0, just like all Booleans are set to false. So right now, at the end of this scene, the integer will go from 0 to 1. So when we go back to the waiting scene, it's now sitting at 1. Now we could have a program here, a trigger inside of waiting that says, hey, if integer is 1, do something different, right? But we're not going to mess with that right now. I just wanted you to know each number can cause something different to happen, all right? So we're going to do the same thing here. Zoop. There. And at scene position, scene end, like this. Control, modify variable. Things increase by 1. Now, one thing to speed things up is I can copy this behavior like this. So all I have to do is go to the next one because they're all doing the same thing, and I can paste it and be done, right? So that's just a way to speed up your workflow. So now over here, what we're going to do is to have a success, we're going to say if variable state, because you can choose two different places for variables here. You can have it say when a variable reaches a certain state, do something, or you can have it change a variable down here. Hence the power of the if-then statement. So variable state, one more time, go down to things, and if it's equal to, you can also choose all these other options, not equal to, greater than, less than, if you need to, but right now we're doing this, equal to 3. We will have it do scene control like this, and it will go to success. And there is your basic kind of layout there. So yeah, you have your 3 buttons, you have your 3 scenes, and once all 3 of these have played, now what this basically does is it kind of replaces the multi-input go-to from the legacy behavior down here. But this gives you much more finer control over what happens and when, which is very nice. Because originally, if something happened down here where just all 3 things got done, it would immediately jump to this. But now we get to have this scene play, this scene play, this scene play, then this scene play, instead of basically negating whatever third scene happens here, right? So that gives you very finer control over what is happening. And now here's a little video of this in action. We have our LEDs to represent our scene states, and then we have our buttons here, 1, 2, 3. So you'll see if I push this one here, it turns that one on like that. That's scene 1. If I push this button here, turns on that one like that. And then when I push this one, it will turn on the third scene, and at the end of that scene, it'll go to the success scene. Just like that. So let's say you have multiple puzzles around the room and 1 button, and every time one of those puzzles gets solved, the button lights up and you hit it and it gives you different information. So this is how you kind of do that with just a single input instead of multiple inputs. So in this situation, we're going to be here waiting for whatever to happen, right? And let's say, let's see, the input state here, when puzzle 1 gets solved, you're going to modify the variable here, and we're going to set it to 1, because remember, they all start at 0. So now, you're going to also have your input state, button 1. If button 1 turns on, and we're going to have this as an and now, the variable state is equal, where is it? Thank you. Is equal to 1, then control outputs, modify variable, etc., etc. There's all these different things. We'll just control an output for now. So LED 1 turns on like that. And then, just for completion's sake, at the end of the action here, you would have the variable, where we go, set back to 0. Right? That way they just can't sit there and keep re-triggering it over and over again. So that's what would happen. So the puzzle 1 turns on, set the variable to 1, and then if you hit the button, then this will turn on. and then that's done. So then it's essentially the same thing. You're going to just copy and paste all this. So we would do the same thing from before, copy there, and now we can just paste and paste. So then really all you have to do is go in and modify the variables like this. So now we'd set that to 2, like that, and then we would come in here and set and things equals 2, turn on LED 2, and so forth. It's the same. That's the nice thing about being able to just kind of, once you get one down, once you understand how one of them works, you can just kind of copy and paste and go through it, especially if you're having to do multiple things like what you're seeing here, like that. And then, and then that goes back to 0. Now, we could take this a step further, that every time you do this, you could have a different variable do what we did earlier, where it's progressing by 1. It increases by 1. So this would be 1, this would be 1, this would be 1, and then you would have your success scene. So using this combined with the previous one, you could do all that as well. And we'll show you an example of this, just like we did before. All right, here's our setup for the single button press as puzzles get solved. So if I press this, nothing happens until I push one of these buttons. Now that LED comes on and nothing else. Even if I push this again, it doesn't do anything. But now when this one is solved, I push this button again, boom, that light comes on, push this button here, and now that light comes on. So there is a way you can have a single button controlling a bunch of different stuff. Now we're going to move on to the other side of the variables, the Booleans. Now, technically, most of the stuff that you can do with a Boolean, you can also do with an integer and vice versa. They're fairly interchangeable, but I want to cover both with specific examples just to kind of help you understand things. I have named this Boolean more things. The first thing I want to show you is, let's say you need to double up on inputs. Let's say you have 8 inputs on your controller, but you need a 9th button. What do? Well, what you can do is make it where if it's an input from earlier in the show, then you need it later in the show, you can have it turn off. All right, so let's kind of go over that. Again, the variables start at false when the show starts, so you know it'll always be false. So let's say at the end of, we'll do this here. We'll say input state button 1. Whenever you hit that, scene control, and it will go to thing 1. All right. So now what's going to happen is in thing 1, we're going to have it do its behavior, going to do its whatever, its scene. And then again, I like to use scene position for a lot of stuff. At scene end, what we're going to do is we're going to modify the variable, more things, set to true, like that. Now we're going to go back to waiting here. And I'm going to modify this. Okay, I'm going to say if the following condition is true, if button 1 turns on and variable state is equal to false. Now again, you do have these options: equal, not equal to. I just use equal to a lot of the times. There might be a time for you to do this, especially when you get into really involved shows and stuff. But right now, equal to is fine. So if button 1 turns on and it starts out as false, then that will play. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to, again, from before, copy and paste. And now what we're going to do is we're going to change this to, if this is now true, then this will play scene 2 like this. So, and this is really handy when you only need to do 2 things. That's, again, hence because it is a binary option, on, off, etc., etc. If you need to progress through more things, obviously the integer, as I showed earlier, is better for that. And so then now you would have this, and you wouldn't need to change this for any reason. I mean, technically you could, let's see, scene position, at scene end. You could have this go back to false if you wanted to. However, what I find better to do is at the very end of your show, when everything is done, is you come over here and let's see, scene position we'll do at scene start. You have instead of instead of doing everything at a time, you go under system command here and just reset everything. You can have it reset everything or just have it reset a few things, but I usually just do everything because that will reset your outputs, your variables, exactly what it says, everything. So, and it's, as you can see here, it'll set your integer variables to 0 and Booleans back to false. So that way there's no issues. Somebody accidentally re-triggers something or something wacky happens like that. So, but yeah, so in this case, if you need to double up on an input where you need just one extra scene, just one extra button, that is a thing Booleans are very good for. So as you can see, variables give you a finer control over a number of things, including the order of operations of how inputs and outputs react to each other. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through an example that I have. If you recall back to the variables and behaviors video when these things first released, I did have an example in there, but I want to give you a different one to kind of show you some other options that are available. So let's say you have a pressure switch that you need to stand on first, then a switch you have to throw, then push a button, and then magic happens, essentially. So to do that, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the pressure switch here, and we're going to have, whenever you step on it, it's going to modify the variable and set it to true, like this. And then over here, we're going to have the switch. That's right there, switch ones. And then, of course, if this is true, then what'll happen is it'll turn on an LED. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the state of this LED to control kind of how things work, right? You could have a second variable here that is, called LED. And so you could have multiple trues and falses running all at the same time. But in this case, I'm going to use the animation value, okay? So now if the pressure switch turns on, and there we go, and the LED, where is it, output state, and the LED animation. Now, something to keep in mind here is if it's animation here in the timeline, you use all outputs. If it's a behavior controlled output, you click on that. Just so you know, that's a thing there. So now if the output is off, then we're going to have another variable control where it sets this one to false. All right, so this is where we're at right now. Just hang with me. We're almost through it. Now, the variable state, if more things equals true, and the LED control value, output state, and the LED control value is on, and button 3 here turns on, then you will get your scene control of your success scene, like this. Now, there also needs to be, let's say you don't want somebody, because right now in this setup, what would happen is if somebody stepped on the pad and toggled the switch, but then somebody stepped off of the pad, it would still technically work, right? Which is not what you want, because we're using the LED to control the value of a kind of. Also, the LED value is acting as another type of variable, quite frankly. So now we're going to say if the pressure switch is off, and then you do this and select if the toggle switch, if the pressure switch, toggle switch, pressure switch is off, and up here you change this from all to any. So this becomes, instead of, you'll notice here this changes from an and to an or. So if this is off or this is off, then what happens is it turns the LED off as well. So now what will happen is you have to step on the pressure switch first, then you have to hit the toggle switch, then you can push, the LED comes on, and then the button comes on. But the LED will not come on if you toggle the switch and then step on the pressure switch. I know this is very convoluted, but I do have an example to show you so you can kind of understand what is happening in real time. Let's take a look. I have my pressure switch, my toggle switch. If I do this and this, that light comes on. But if I let go, it turns off. If I flip the switch first and push the button, nothing happens. I have to turn the switch off, then back on, and now that enables me to hit this button, which turns that light on. I'm now going to walk you through a fairly advanced variable show that I created for an 80s themed escape room using Duck Hunt as a shooting gallery game. And I always wanted to do a shooting gallery game where it would be really random, and now with variables and behaviors, it's totally possible. So I was very excited to get to do this. But first, let me show you the layout of kind of what everything is. So over here is my outputs, 1 through 6. These are the lights behind the ducks that light up. Over here are the variables. Each duck gets its own variable, as you can see here. And then under groups, I have a group called ducks with each duck being its own little scene here like this. All right, so that's our initial layout. So let's get into the behaviors and stuff. So over here, every duck pretty much looks like this, just some of the names have been changed. And you'll notice that the scene itself is only about a minute and a half, second and a half long, like this. And but the ducks are only on for about a second, and this is just to allow a buffer kind of for the players right there. So you'll see here if the scene is at the end, it'll play a random scene from the group ducks. So that's what happens. A duck lights up, and then it will go jump to the next random, and that's over here. That's this scene, ducks, because you can rename these little group names right here. So this is where we're pulling our randomness from, and I'm going to open this up so you can kind of see how this works. So over here you'll see under scene control, play a scene, random scene in a group, group ducks. So that's how that works. Now, if you shoot a duck, it will turn on, and you'll get a sound effect from that, and that's this behavior here. So if input 1 turns off, because I think these were laser sensors, which were on by default, so I had to have this turn off. So it's kind of a normally closed situation. So if that turns off, then the duck 1 variable is set to true. And then you go to the scene good shot, which would just feedback, and it turns duck 1 output on right here. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but if you hover over these, it'll tell you what the output and input is right there. You can see. So duck 1, you sit there and go, what is that? Oh, output 1. So in case you ever need to know that, though, that's just some little tooltip, literally and figuratively. Anyway. So once that turns on, now the group needs to know how to skip over the ducks that are lit up, so you don't end up having to sit there and wait like multiple seconds between ducks, because I didn't want it. I wanted it to go to see a duck has been shot and then skip it entirely in the chain. And so that is right here. You'll see if duck 01 equals true, which was down here, and the scene is at start, then it knows to skip that duck and play a random scene. So it starts going back into the random at the start there. And then also you'll see here, it knows that if the light is not on, if this is not set, if it's set to false, it knows to turn the light on. So that's essentially how it goes. So it's playing a random scene. If it comes into the scene and it sees that the variable is false, it'll turn the duck on for 1 second. The scene plays out and it finishes, and then it goes to another random scene. If the duck is shot, it turns the LED on over here. It sets the variable to true, and so the next time it comes through the loop, if it sees the duck variable is true, then it goes back to playing a random scene. And that's pretty much how it worked, which is great. And of course, you're asking, how does it know when everything is on? Well, that's over here in the main show settings, behaviors. You'll see here, if all of these equal true, then it knows to play the success scene right here. So that's all done because this controller was basically for only for that game. It wasn't just a room. It wasn't a room controller. It was being used as a puzzle controller at the time. So that right there shows you how to integrate variables to be able to do something on a more involved level. Hopefully this video has taken some of the fear out of the variables for you guys and helped you understand them better. And just so you know, you can mix Booleans and integers together in the behaviors. There's not one or the other. So just remember, variables are your friends. They are not to be feared. And I hope you guys go and make really cool things with them. And we'll see you next time.